Hi, and this is Total Anarchy, and I am for now Melanie Johnson.
And Bob.
And today we were going to talk about defensive force, or if it's defensive force, against non enforcer state agents. So people like librarians. Bob, although he's a co owner of the website, he's not a guest, is the only person I found who is a more extreme anarchist than me. So I think that it is, so whether or not it violates the NAP, whether or not it's otherwise immoral, and whether or not it's strategically sound, using any level of force, really, against non-enforcer state agents as such. So, like, obviously, if a librarian is breaking into your car, you can... Their status as a librarian doesn't protect them from otherwise
not particularly relevant at that point.
But using force against them as such. So I think it's a NAP violation, which then would also make it immoral, and there's really no strategic reason to do it if it's a NAP violation, and I don't think it's going to really get you anywhere, but Bob disagrees.
Sure. Well, strategically, no, of course not. It's a terrible plan. Like, yeah, in terms of strategy, and whatnot, and you have made a good point in the past about some of them being rather unaware of their status and thus open for.
I've only said that about mailmen, which I think is a terrible example, which is why I use librarians. Librarians know that they work for the state.
Sure. And in my experience, most of them are raging socialists anyway.
Well, and like I said, they might be committing some other aggression, like being a socialist.
Right. So, I think fundamentally the issue is our belief in taxes. You think that it's, not to put words in your mouth, but, well, that's not a really great way to have a conversation with an audience, since we've been over this argument many times. It's one of our favorite things to do, is just randomly debate things. So my position is that taxation is the thing. Everything else stems from that.
Taxation is what thing?
It is the core problem. And living off of taxes. That is... I would go as far as saying that taxes are slavery.
Right, but
free-range slavery, obviously not to the same level as chattel slavery, but...
Well, there's a spectrum of different levels of how worse a particular type of slavery is.
Sure.
So that's not really the issue. But, so, yes, taxes are slavery, they're theft, they're whatever, which is why you can walk up to an IRS agent anytime you feel like it and shoot them in the head. It's a really bad idea.
Right.
And you shouldn't do it. But you can.
Right.
But librarians aren't, and we could use a different example, I just think this is the best example.
No, that's fair.
Librarians aren't collecting taxes.
Yeah, except they are. I mean, they're not the ones out there pointing a gun, no, but they're the ones giving them an extra impetus to point the gun.
So, they're going to collect taxes whether they provide benefits or not, and they're going to collect taxes whether they have what you're calling an excuse or not. Those are really... I don't see how those are related. Like, they don't raise taxes every time they build a new library, or every time they build a new road, or every time they provide a new service.
They usually do. And we have this temporary tax that's going to last forever.
So they'll do that for certain infrastructure. Like, they did it for, what was it, the Spanish-American War, and kept that tax on for, like, a century or something stupid, but... The level of taxation is unrelated to the level of service provided. If it wasn't, they would just go into business.
Sure. Not to mention that they'll just, like, and they'll also just inflate the money supply to pay for things too, so.
But I also don't see a fundamental difference, a NAP difference, or a moral difference between taking X level of state services versus taking X level of state services that equals enough to live off of. So if you're taking $1 from the state versus if you're taking $30,000 from the state,
yeah.
I don't see why those are necessarily morally different if we don't know anything about your victimization level prior to that.
Yeah, they aren't really.
Okay, so then
it's a matter of degrees, not a matter of kind. Now, I do think it is important, the whole idea of the net state victim versus net state aggressor.
Right, but you don't know that about every government employee. So
no, this is true, and I wouldn't say to, like, even if it was strategically all right at this point in time, I wouldn't say to just go out and kill every librarian. In fact, I would, like, I think, yes, I would absolutely agree that they are, that they are a lesser offender than a Leo, for sure.
Right, but that doesn't make... Just because somebody's a lesser offender than a Leo does not mean the NAP is prohibiting you from using violence against them by any means.
Sure.
One of the more egregious
I put them in the same... I put them in the same category as a voter. Like, a voter is... unless somebody is voting purely defensively...
Well, voting is too broad of a category in the first place because you can vote. You can vote against the ballot initiative.
Right.
You can also vote for. In some places, you can vote for fictional characters.
Mm-hmm.
So voting, I think, is too broad. I mean, that's just a whole other topic. That's too broad of a behavior.
Right. So what I'm
classify.
Right, which is why I'm making the caveat of if you vote defensively, that is, you vote for lower taxes, decriminalization. Just lesser government in general.
But that could be arguably most voting.
If you're voting for a politician, then you're voting for rulers for other people. And if somebody shoots you over it, fine.
So even if...
Like, it's bad strategy, but
even
whatever.
So even if you vote, like, against Bernie Sanders, who's just going to steal everything and kill everyone...
But they're all
They're not all exactly the same.
Yeah.
You could argue that the presidential elections are maybe predetermined. That might be the case.
Well...
But, so at a local level, if there's somebody who's basically Bernie Sanders, and then there's somebody who's a night watchman minarchist...
Yeah, that would be... I would probably conclude
I don't see how
defensive.
That's not defensive. So, in any election where there's a clear worse option...
Yeah.
So, that's most elections.
Right.
So, then that's kind of a non-distinction because most voting, at least can be, depending on what you're voting for, defensive.
Can be,
Plus, a lot of states have everything on the... Not everything, but a lot of states have just pretty heavy ballot initiatives. So, there might be... when I was in Louisiana on any given election, there might be 12 ballot initiatives and 2 elections. Yeah. So to say that all voting in a place like that can't be defensive.
No, of course. And it depends on what you're voting for. So, like...
But then at that point, for example... Once you make that many caveats, you're no longer talking about voting as such. You're talking about voting for an increase in government, which is different than voting as such.
Fair enough. Okay, so yes, voting for an increase in government, which I would say is what most voters do, is an act of aggression, and
I would say that
deal with
voting
you
for an increase in government is a lot worse than being a librarian. Because one of them is you're making a hit to the states, and the other one is you hand out books and take some stolen money.
No, that's not the point of librarians. I mean, that's what they do on the front. That's the front. It's like the...
Or do librarians have functions I'm unaware of? Because...
Well, yeah, okay, so it's like the mafia that has, like, the restaurant front. to do their business behind in the back room. Um, it's that same sort of thing. Librarians exist to justify the existence of the state.
So
That's why the state creates them, is so that, like, oh, hey, look, we're doing this thing. See, we're good and benevolent.
I don't.
So it's like the
think that it's that clear cut.
they're the mouthpiece for
I think
the state in a lot
just
of ways.
does random shit.
No, I think that's why the state generally does those things, is just to justify their own existence, and then eventually they take on a life of their own, and the department the department starts doing things to justify its existence and its budget, and to, like, oh, hey, look, we spent every dollar, we need more tax dollars this next year.
But you're not talking about librarians anymore.
Yeah, it's every government department. It's every government agency.
You're not talking about the position of librarian. We can have a debate on the position of the person in charge of the budget, and that's an entirely different debate because they're doing entirely different things. The position of librarian, A, I don't think you can hold them to that knowledge, and B, I don't think that if they close down every library tomorrow that the state would cease to exist.
No, absolutely not. But
and I also don't think if they close down everything that was an actual benefit tomorrow, the state would... Because you're talking about roads and libraries and fire departments.
I mean,
So if they got rid of all of those things, there would still be a state.
I'm not really sure the libraries are a benefit anymore, not when the internet exists.
Well, libraries also provide internet, especially to some places that don't have good options, even if you're paying for it. And, I mean, books still exist.
I mean, libraries provide...
Like, they might not be a benefit to a middle-class adult.
Like, libraries provide... Well, I mean, really, let's be honest. Libraries provide a safe place for homeless people to harass little kids.
In some places, I'm sure that's true.
That's what libraries exist for these days.
I don't know. I haven't actually been in. I think it's been like 3 years since I've been inside of a library. Yeah. But
when I first moved, I went to one fairly frequently because it was right across the street, and I just moved, so I didn't have internet.
I went to the one in Keene once or twice because I had to download a government form, and it would only allow you to download it on Internet Explorer.
Yeah.
And I didn't have Windows at that time, so I went there to do that.
Right.
And I didn't see any homeless people.
Yeah. The one in Nashua, those certainly...
Yeah, so, I mean, so that's going to depend on where you are, but...
Yeah.
They can still have rules against behavior, and some of them do, so they can't kick you out for being homeless, but they can kick you out for harassing people.
Yeah.
So...
But yeah, it generally seems like a place... Most of them I've seen, it seems like a place to mingle homeless people and little kids, which seems like a really, really bad idea. Like, the level of bad idea that only the state could have. Yeah,
so, and that will happen anytime tragedy in commons, that's, to be expected. So... But I think the question boils down to, is it a NAP violation to take state resources? Because I don't think that libraries justify the existence of the state any more than roads or any other form of welfare does.
No, it's just one avenue.
Right. So then the question is, does using any state resources violate the NAP? And if not, why is being a non-Leo or non-enforcer state agent different?
So I think it, like I said, goes back to the idea of being a net tax victim. So if you used to have a real job, and then they making, say, $200,000 a year, and they were taking $100,000 a year from you,
which is about what they would be taking,
right? And so you go and so then, like, you retire and you're like, I'm bored. I'm gonna go get a job as a librarian for a few hours a week. Okay. I mean, that's that, like, you're not taking more than you've been stolen from.
So
all right.
But that is... So then you're making assumptions. So you're saying in some circumstances it's not violation to be a librarian.
Yeah.
Because...
Yeah,
but then that doesn't mean that being a librarian is a NAP violation. So in certain circumstances, it's a NAP violation to pick up a disc and walk away from it, and walk away with it, and those circumstances would be if it's not your disc.
Right.
But you can't say picking up a disc and walking away with it is a NAP violation, because it's not.
Right. No, and I'm not saying that just simply being a librarian is necessarily a NAP violation. I'm saying living off of taxes is.
Well, that's pretty much what you're doing, unless you're independently wealthy and being a librarian just for kicks.
Well, again, like, there's the net. There's the issue of the net.
Well, so is that what you think the main issue is? Is whether or not... Okay, so...
Yes, it's living off of taxes. Just like welfare recipients are NAP violators. So... If that's what they've been doing most of their lives. I think
that it is so wildly unlikely that any given person is not a net state victim.
I mean, if you've been working for them for most of your life, you're definitely...
But there's other ways. So you can be not a net taxpayer, and that is entirely possible. Mm-hmm. That is different than being a net state victim.
For sure.
So would you say that about... So are you saying they have to be net taxpayers, or are you saying they have to be net state victims? Because those are
net state victims.
Okay. So I think that it is wildly unlikely that anyone is not... such to make it just a non-issue. Such to make that if you found somebody that was, that would be the exception, and you would treat that as a special case instead of treating every single librarian as an anomaly who happens to be a net state victim. Because I think it's impossible to not be... It's almost impossible to not be a net state victim. Most people were put in day prison for 8 hours a day for not the first 18 years, but, 16, 17 years of their life. Maybe they weren't in the first up to 3 years. They start preschool at 3 now.
Yeah.
They probably got pulled over when they were 16 too many times because there's certain demographics they like to pick on, and one of them is you're too young. Mm-hmm. They may or may not have been harassed or otherwise victimized by the state. There were laws that they have to live under, whether they break them and then get victimized for breaking them, or whether they just don't break the laws for fear of having been threatened by the state.
Well, everyone breaks the laws. I mean, the whole 3 felonies a day thing.
Yeah, but everyone doesn't break laws that actually get enforced.
Yeah.
So, to me, to say that somebody even makes it to 18 without having been massively victimized by the state is just wildly unlikely, that I'm not going to necessarily even consider it unless there's evidence that that's the case.
I don't know. I'm not so sure, because, I mean, obviously it ends up being a very esoteric and even subjective thing, because, how much... Because, okay, yeah, you've had, you've had, I think it's 13 years of state indoctrination for most people, and even
it's more than that now.
Okay. But, and then on top of that, there's taxes, and there's, Leo encounters and whatnot.
Not even encounters, just them being there, and knowing, this guy is probably about to kill me, or this guy, if I do XYZ, he's going to violently attack me.
Right.
That counts, too.
No, absolutely. I would say that the presence of a Leo is a credible death threat, and thus defensible.
Right. Who gets to value that? Does the victim get to value that? So if somebody who wasn't the state did all these things to you, and you had a claim against them, does some third party get to come in and say, okay, this assault was worth X dollars, and well, it wouldn't be dollars, but this assault, I'm the arbitrator, and I'm saying this assault was worth X Bitcoin, and this threat was worth X Bitcoin. Like,
right.
You can't, because it's subjective, because value is subjective, you can't put a limit on a victim and say you can only get X value from each of these violations.
Sure, but okay, so the issue, I think the core issue then is what is I guess I'm just more cynical on that's not quite the right word, but on where that balance is. Because, yeah, okay, there's all these things like that make essentially everyone a victim of the state, but then, like, all right, you're living off of taxes, that's a strike against you as well. And
so
then,
you're making
let me finish my point, please. And then, like, you're voting for more government, which if you're a government agent, you absolutely are. Like, I've never met one who hasn't voted for more government. Some of them think they're voting for less government. They're always voting for more government, especially people in the military. Like, always.
Okay, well, the military isn't a non-enforcement.
Right, agreed. But I mean, like, government agents in general, the vast majority of librarians, to use that specific example I've run across, are like dyed-in-the-wool socialists. They're and they're voting for it. So that's another strike. There's if you call the cops on somebody, that's,
but you're bringing in additional aggressions.
Right, exactly, to for the net victim, because if you're if you're committing aggressions in the name of the state, using the state to commit aggressions, that's lowering your net victim status.
Okay, so if someone is a librarian and also is a serial killer, clearly they're an aggressor. Right. But that's not the question. The question is this one act an act of aggression?
Well, no, I don't think that is the question. And like I said, like, yeah, I think if that was the only thing that you are allowed to look at.
But if you're asking, is this an act in aggression, that is the only thing you're allowed to look at.
Because you're stacking the deck. And yeah, I think just living off of taxes is an act of aggression.
Okay, but then it sounds to me like you don't believe that whether or not you're a net stake victim is the question, but you're sounding more like you think it matters whether or not you're a net tax victim.
No, because you're stacking the deck. Because what I'm saying is, yeah, okay, you have to balance all these things out, and yes, it's impossible to actually do because there's so many factors on both sides, and how those things are valued is subjective. So it's impossible to do in any in any objective manner. But no, what I'm saying is, yeah, okay, so you have these things on this side, and it's kind of unfair to allow. Okay, well, you allow where the state has aggressed against people.
Because the state necessarily aggressed against people. But you're not necessarily a socialist.
Agreed, but, like, well, if you're living off of taxes, yeah, you are. Then you are necessarily, your actions show you to be a socialist. So yeah, you are.
The first thing is, because value is subjective, that means you cannot then superimpose a value on a particular act. So if a cop walks up to you and punches you in the face once, and that victim wants to say that is worth $20 million, because value is subjective, there's nothing on a philosophical standpoint. I might think it's ridiculous, but there's nothing on a philosophical standpoint where I could come in and say, no, it's not. It's actually only worth $7,000. Right. And then the second issue is, I do think you have some selection bias in there, because somebody who is a socialist and proud of, working for the state and proud of all these things, you're more likely to hear from them that they're a librarian. Right. You don't know if they're not telling you.
Sure, but like I said, I mean, anybody who's living off of government money is their actions show them to be a socialist of one kind or another.
I don't.
But
that doesn't follow.
Okay, but
because socialism is a philosophy.
Well, let's look at. Well, I mean, yes, but it's also. But right, it's also a spectrum of philosophies, like for anywhere from just like a basic like neocon or even constitutionalist socialist to to like a tanky, he like loves the Soviet Union sort of socialist communist. Like it's a spectrum. Like because if you're not a voluntarist and an ANCAP or an agorist, you're a socialist of some kind.
Okay, so I mean, so how much is 13 to 15 years of abuse by the state worth? I mean, what's the dollar amount on that?
Okay, so but think about it in this way too. So you get the people who are like, well, I paid into Social Security, so therefore, and I want to get that money, therefore it's okay to force young people who will never see that money to pay into it.
Okay, so collecting from
those people are socialist degenerates.
Collecting
they're vile
from Social Security is not a NAP violation.
No, it's not.
Advocating for Social Security is a NAP violation.
Right, that's what I mean. Exactly. So, like, but that's a okay, so, like, yes, they have been they've been aggressed against in being forced to pay for socialist insecurity. But it is then aggression for them to advocate that other people
advocate
the
continuation of that aggression. Yes.
Yes.
So if you want to say,
and I think like actions speak louder than words. So if somebody is working for the government in any capacity, their actions are saying whatever they say. Their actions are showing that they are supporting the continuation of that aggression.
So if you want to say that most librarians are probably socialists and probably advocates of socialism,
well, they necessarily are because they live off
of all these other programs, therefore they're aggressors, I don't think I'm going to have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. But saying that by definition being a librarian makes you an aggressor, I don't think you've established.
Well, no,
bringing in all this extraneous stuff.
Well, because that was never my point. My point was always the taxes and the and
right. But as of now, in current day, being a librarian means you live off taxes.
Right. Well, not necessarily, because there are volunteers. There are people who just volunteer a few, here and there, and that's. I mean, it's gross because you're interacting with the state, but like, okay, and of course there are.
We're talking about people who work as a librarian.
Right. Well,
so they are by definition receiving tax funds, right. As is everyone who drives on the road.
No, because that's not receipt. No, because that's just, hey, we stole this from you, and hey, we're gonna let you use it. Like, I mean, that's just a weird.
The strip of road down there was probably stolen from the guy whose house is next to it.
Right, but they continue to... Yeah, no, this is true, and that's much like the border issue. That land belongs to whoever it was stolen from. Whoever can prove the best claim to it.
Yeah, so being a librarian, I cannot definitively say makes you a non-state victim. Therefore, I can't say that it necessarily makes you an aggressor.
Sure, absolutely. But I think we're largely at this point saying the same thing, just from different directions.
Okay, but I thought that your position was that non-enforcers are aggressors.
So I think by and large they are. Now my subjective valuation of them voting for more government, advocating for more government, living off of taxes is I believe that is a higher level of aggression than you do. And so I think that I think most of them overstep the bounds to go past being net victims and become net victimizers.
If they are voting for more government and advocating for more government, that is not part of being a librarian, and then they are pretty serious aggressors at that point.
Sure. Okay. So that
living
that
off of tax money is really what
so
was in.
okay. So then then we are saying the same thing, because essentially what I'm saying is, yeah, because I think those are fundamental things. Like, they're not. Yeah. So yes, not necessarily everybody does that. Although, like I said, I do think I do think that having that job in the first place is an advocation of that job and its continued existence. So I think
So people who work. Okay, so if you're a doctor, are you advocating continued illness?
No, but you're advocating that you're saying that, hey, I think doctors are a good thing, which they are.
Right, but if there wasn't continued illness, you said they were advocating the continuation of that position. If there wasn't continued illness, there wouldn't be the position of doctor.
But I mean, you're not. I mean, this side of the second coming, you're not going to get rid of illness, or.
You're injury. Probably not going to get rid of the state either. I'm not convinced that we will accomplish that ever.
I mean,
that doesn't mean.
Well,
but that's different than advocating for it.
Because of other views, I absolutely am. That maybe not in my lifetime, but I'm almost certainly not. Although we are living in an era where change is happening faster and faster.
Okay, so pre-second coming, whether that happens or not, absent or pre/absent that,
right?
I do not have full confidence that the state will be dissolved in that time period.
Wow.
Whether that time period extends to the heat death of the universe or not, I don't have confidence in the state being dissolved in that time period.
Well, certainly the state will end before the heat death of the universe, because if not, it'll have wiped out all of humanity long before then.
Not if it's smart, but.
Well, it's not. So it's the state.
So it's so do you think that there is anything inherently different between living off of NAP-wise, between living off of tax money and living off of tax money as a employee?
No, I think welfare recipients are just as guilty.
Okay, so I don't think that you can establish. Now, most of them are. If you're talking about just being a tax victim.
Right.
If you're talking about being a state victim, I do not possibly see how that is even possible.
Fair enough, but that's fair. It's a strike against them. It doesn't necessarily override their victimhood status, but it is certainly a strike.
Right. Yeah. So
and now I think there are some who do. No, it's generally not like the single mother on food stamps and WIC and everything else. But the ones who probably do are your big corporations. The living off of corporate welfare and regulatory capture. They're probably net aggressors. You're certainly, certainly your Lockheed Martins, GE.
Okay, well, Lockheed Martin is an aggressor.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, but they're the people who make it up have been victimized by the state, but I think certainly the ones at the top are net aggressors, easily. The janitor working at GE, or
the janitor working at GE is not a beneficiary of subsidies.
Yeah, they are. I mean, GE only exists because of government intervention, because of
I don't know how you could possibly determine that.
I believe they make most of their money through government contracts.
I don't think that's true.
And they own NBC, which is just a mouthpiece for the government. It has been for a long time. So, they're propaganda. They're part of the propaganda wing of the government.
I can't determine someone's net victim status
the janitor is
without ascribing value to their particular victim
Sure.
aggressions against them,
Mm-hmm.
and because value is subjective, I can't do that. So I
Mm-hmm.
can't determine their net victim
Right.
status.
Well, but then you have to go with, you have to make some sort of determination, and it's not objective. This is true, and that's okay.
But then I'm making a
value judgment.
A value judgment against something, on something that I am saying explicitly is subjective.
Right.
But in order to determine that you have violated the NAP.
Yeah, and it's...
That seems not... I
understand what you're saying. It is a weird position, but the fact is...
It's not just that it's a weird position, it is a contradictory position.
No, it's not, because, like...
Saying that something is subjective, but I'm going to enforce with the pain of the NAP my valuation on it is a contradiction. Because
you're aggressing against me. Like...
But they're not, because they're not collecting taxes.
Who isn't?
Librarians and janitors at GE.
Okay. Well, no, like I said, a janitor at GE is almost certainly a net victim of the state. I'm talking like the CEO is almost certainly a net aggressor.
I can't make that. Once the state victimizes you, I think it's game over. Now, does that sit well with me? No.
Would
I like that to not be the case?
I disagree. There are collaborators with the state,
but I think part of the issue here is that so many people are victims of the state. So many people are just if you just take the U.S., so many people are victims of the U.S. that it kind of makes you want to create a category division that isn't there. So if somebody from Russia or China came over to the U.S. and said, I'm going to be a firefighter and I'm going to be a librarian, they're not a net victim of the U.S. because as far as I know, there's no, there is no international policy of the U.S. that's victimizing Russia or China because they're kind of big enough to...
Tariffs?
Against Russia?
I believe so. And, I mean, they've certainly had sanctions in the past, and the U.S. forces every other country to follow in the steps of the drug war. So yeah, there's probably nobody on. There are very few people on Earth who have not been victimized. So that's just kind of
how the chips fall when you victimize every person on Earth.
Right.
So now, if I was to go to Russia and be a firefighter and be a librarian, well, that's a problem because Russia doesn't owe me anything. Russia's never victimized me. Russia's never stolen 30% of my income.
But
I don't know that, and I also don't know that I'm buying anything from Russia.
Well, it doesn't really matter because if you're buying things that have raw materials that are Russian,
but I don't think that I am.
You probably are.
So if I go over
Russia's
there,
a very large place.
But also, okay, so a theft is something that can be like, yes, value is subjective, but $10 is worth $10. I can't say, this $10 is worth this $20 million.
Well, I mean, at the same time, you know what's worth less than $1? The same dollar tomorrow.
Okay, but that's calculatable. Whereas 13, 15 years of indoctrination and mental abuse is not calculable. Being Terry stopped by an officer is not calculable.
Sure.
Inflation is calculable.
Sure.
So, even if it is the case that Russia has stolen $20 from me or something petty like that, I cannot go to Russia and be a librarian, be a firefighter, and just live off that and make $20,000-$30,000 US dollars equivalent a year because they don't owe me that.
Right.
I'm not a victim of Russia. So, yes, there is that determination. I don't think you get to move the goalpost just because the U.S. has decided that they're going to victimize every human being on Earth. They still owe those debts. The fact that it creates weird situations where you could just go be a librarian
but then you're saying that, like, the CEO of Lockheed Martin is...
No, because the CEO of Lockheed Martin is creating weapons and giving them to the U.S., so he's committing aggression for that.
I mean, that's what GE does, too.
Okay, I don't
So
have the
then
business plan of every corporation.
Right, but I mean,
now.
those are some of the biggest, like, military contractors.
Okay,
GE,
but
Lockheed
so then
Martin,
that's
etc.
aggression.
Or, you know, the company, I forget what they're called now, what used to be Blackwater. Like,
Okay, so that's aggression. If
Right.
you're giving weapons to the U.S.
Okay,
government,
so then
that is aggression. But
so
that
at
has
what point-
nothing to do with your income stream.
So at what point are you a collaborator and what point are you not? Because I think at some point, if you're living off of enough taxes, yeah, you probably are a collaborator. So like Trump having the state steal an old lady's house so that he can build a new property for him, so he can build a new property, like, that's being a collaborator.
Well, that's theft regardless.
Right. I mean, you know, like, I mean, and
Trump is also the president.
Well, right, but I mean, even before he was still a collaborator with the state. He was still one of their comrades.
Okay, but I think this bleeds
and
into...
yes, I use that term very intentionally.
The second issue, because you can be heinously immoral and not violate the NAP.
Sure.
So if the only victimization you had in your entire life was one time a cop Terry stopped you, not in a TSA kind of way,
right.
You know, in a regular kind of way, and you say, well, you know what? I'm being a firefighter. From now on, I'm just making $30,000. I don't know what they make.
Yeah, obviously it's going to be...
Whatever it is, it's going to be a lot of money over the rest of your lifetime, and I'm going to be a firefighter, I'm going to be a librarian, and that's what you do. Are you violating the NAP? The only way I can say you're violating the NAP
I think
is
so.
if I say I'm placing a definitive U.S. dollar valuation on a thing that I say is subjectively valued. But that doesn't mean that I don't find that grossly misvalued. And so from a moral standpoint, I could say, you know what? That sounds like you're valuing this way too much. I think you're a fucked up human being. I think you're behaving immorally to just live off of this $30,000 a year that was stolen from other people because you're valuing, you know, one kind of minor on the spectrum aggression at you decided to value that at $30,000. Do I think that's heinously immoral? Yes. But is it a NAP violation? No, because the only way I can get there is by saying I can value things that even, and also say that their value is subjective. But that's also not where most people are. Most people were victims even most people not in the U.S. were victims of the U.S. way beyond that point.
Sure. Yeah, I can live with that.
Okay.
Seems like a fair place to probably end things. We're sitting at about 43 minutes, so.
Okay, yeah, so then not necessarily not violation to be a librarian. That's what we've determined today.
Depends on how much you advocate for the state.
Well, that's a separate issue. That's a NAP violation.
Right.
Then
Fair
we
enough.
will talk about something equally as important next week.